Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the source materials you send us and, well, we dig into them to pull out the really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, see what's beneath the surface.
Exactly. So today we're focusing on a particular dinosaur, Bienosaurus. We've got a Wikipedia page, an excerpt from a scientific paper.
Standard sources for these kinds of explorations.
Right. And our mission basically is to figure out what Bienosaurus is, where it fits in the whole dinosaur picture, and maybe the most interesting part, why it gets this label dubious.
Ah, the dubious designation. Always intriguing.
Isn't it? And it all seems to center around the Lower Lufeng Formation in China. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Right, the Lufeng Basin, you really can't talk about Banosaurus without it. It's been a gold mine for early Jurassic dinosaur fossils. Collection started way back, actually, 1938.
1938.
Yeah, by the Chinese paleontologist Mian Bian. He was working in what they call the dark red beds of the Lower Lufeng Formation.
Dark red beds. Sounds dramatic.
It does. And what's really interesting is that right near the beginning, among Bian's first finds, was something pretty significant. A nearly complete lower jaw and part of a skull.
Okay, and what did they think it was back then?
Well, the initial thought was that it was related to Solidosaurus, one of those early armored dinosaurs.
Solidosaurus, got it. So a find like that, you'd expect it to make waves pretty quickly, right? A new armored dinosaur relative?
You would think so. But here's a bit of a twist. That specific fossil, the jaw and skull fragment, it wasn't actually formally described, given a proper scientific name, until 2001.
2001. From 1938, that's over 60 years.
It is a really long time for something potentially significant to sit on a shelf, so to speak.
Why the delay? Any ideas? That seems like a huge gap.
Well, it's hard to say for sure from our sources. Maybe research focus was just elsewhere. Perhaps more complete skeletons were found around the same time.
Or maybe just the process back then. Preparing fossils, writing papers, it all took longer.
That's definitely possible, too. Paleontology in the mid-20th century, it operated at a different pace, different priorities sometimes.
Makes sense. So, okay, jump forward to 2001. Who finally described it?
That was Dong Jiming, another really important Chinese paleontologist.
Okay.
He's the one who formally described the specimen, which had the catalog number IVPP V9612 at the time.
Okay.
And he named it Bienosaurus lufengensis.
Ah, Bienosaurus. So the bien part, that's honoring the original discoverer, Manian Bien.
Exactly. Bien's lizard. Well, that's
Yeah.
pretty standard practice. And lufengensis. Well, that tells you where it's from.
The Lufeng Basin. Right, straightforward enough.
Connects it right back to its roots.
Now here's a fun detail I spotted. It almost had a different name, something about Michael Crichton.
Oh, right. Yes. Apparently, Dong considered naming it Bienosaurus crichtoni.
Seriously, after the Jurassic Park author.
Yeah, as a tribute. It didn't happen in the end, obviously, but it's kind of a cool what if.
It really is. Shows the pop culture reach of dinosaurs, doesn't it?
Definitely. But, okay, back to the science. Let's look at where it fits, classification-wise. The sources lay it out pretty clearly. You start broad. Domain Eukaryota, Kingdom Animalia, Phylum Chordata.
The usual biological address.
Right. Then we get specific. Clade Dinosauria. Okay, it's a dinosaur. Then Clade Ornithischia.
Bird hip dinosaurs. Got it.
Yep. Then Saphornithischia Genosauria. And then the key one, Clade Thyreophora.
Thyreophoran, that's the armored dinosaurs group, right? Like Stegosaurus and Ankylosaurus.
Exactly. That's the big group. And within that, we finally land on genus Bienosaurus, species B. lufengensis.
So when Dong first described it in 2001, he put it in the family Solidosauridae.
He did. And back then, Solidosauridae was often considered sort of part of the broader Ankylosauria group, the really heavily armored ones.
Okay. But has that classification held up?
Well, that's where things get interesting again. Later studies, as our understanding of these early Thyreophorans evolved, suggested Bienosaurus might be more basal.
Basal, meaning like an earlier offshoot, lower down the family tree.
Pretty much. Think of Thyreophora as this big branching tree of armored dinosaurs. Being basal suggests Bienosaurus might have branched off near the base of that tree, maybe even before the split that led to things like Solidosaurus or the later, more famous Ankylosaurus.
So maybe not quite a direct ancestor of Ankylosaurus, but an early relative in that armored lineage.
Something like that. An early experiment in armor, perhaps.
Okay, so we've got the discovery, the delayed naming, the almost Crichton name, and its initial spot, which then got kind of questioned, which brings us to the big question mark.
The dubious label.
Exactly. Why is Bienosaurus considered dubious? What's the paleontological controversy here?
Right, so this largely stems from a really important study published in 2019.
Huh.
It was by Raven and colleagues Barrett, Maidman, and Zhu Zheng, who's a giant in Chinese paleontology.
Okay, a solid team.
Absolutely. Their paper was in Acta Paleontologica Polonica, and they raised some pretty significant points.
Like what?
Well, first, kind of administrative thing, but still important. That original specimen number, IVPP V9612, turns out it was already assigned to a completely different dinosaur, Sinornithoids, which is like a small feathered carnivore, a troodontid.
Whoops. Okay, that's not ideal. Like finding someone else's mail in your mailbox.
Pretty much. So Banosaurus had to get a new number, but that wasn't the main reason for the dubious tag.
Right, that's just a mix-up. What was the core issue?
The core issue was the fossil itself. Raven and the team argued that Binosaurus lacks any unique defining features, what scientists call autapomorphies.
Autapomorphies, the things that make a species distinct, basically.
Exactly. They couldn't find any specific anatomical trait in the Binosaurus jaw or skull fragments that clearly set it apart from other early Thyreophorans found in the same area or from around the same time.
So, it looks like a generic early armored dinosaur. Is that fair to say?
In a way, yes. It has features you'd expect in an early Thyreophoran, sort of like Stegosaurus, but nothing that screams, I am definitely a unique thing called Bienosaurus.
So, could it be something else we already know?
That's precisely what the 2019 study suggested. They raised the possibility that the Bienosaurus material might actually belong to Tatosaurus.
Tatosaurus, another one from the same formation.
Yes, another early armored dinosaur known from the lower Lufeng Formation. The fossils are fragmentary for both, which makes comparison tricky. But the point is, Bienosaurus didn't have unique features to justify keeping it as a separate valid genus.
Okay, so no unique features, possible confusion with Tatosaurus, leading to the conclusion.
Leading to their conclusion that Bienosaurus should be considered a nomen dubium.
A dubious name. Ouch. Sounds like a demotion in the dinosaur world.
It kind of is, but it's really just part of the scientific process, you know? It means, based on what we have right now, we can't confidently define it as a distinct type. The evidence just isn't unique enough. Doesn't mean it wasn't a real animal, just that we can't securely identify it from these particular bones.
Right. The name is dubious, not necessarily the existence of the animal that left the bones.
Precisely.
Okay, so even if its name is dubious, we still know roughly when this animal lived, based on where it was found.
Oh, absolutely. The lower Lufeng Formation rocks are well dated. They place Bienosaurus, or whatever animal these bones belong to, firmly in the early Jurassic period.
Early Jurassic? How early are we talking?
Most likely the Cinemurian age. We're talking maybe around 196 to 190 million years ago, give or take.
Wow. That's still very early for dinosaurs, especially ornithischians.
It is. And that's why, despite the dubious status, it's still significant. It represents one of the earliest known ornithischians, these bird-hipped dinosaurs, potentially living in the Hitangian or Cinemurian stages right near the beginning of the Jurassic.
So even as a nomen dubium, it tells us something about early armored dinosaur evolution in that part of the world.
Definitely. It's a piece of the puzzle, even if the piece itself is a bit fuzzy around the edges.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We started this journey with bones found way back in the 1930s.
By Mainian Bien.
Which sat waiting for decades before being named Bienosaurus lufengensis in 2001, almost getting that Crichton name.
Right, the near miss.
Then it was initially thought of as a Solidosaurus relative, possibly an early ankylosaur, but later seen as maybe more basal.
More of an early branch.
And finally, this 2019 reevaluation led by Raven and colleagues points out issues like the specimen number mix-up, but crucially, the lack of unique features.
Yeah, the lack of autapomorphies.
Leading to its current status. Nomen dubium, a dubious name, all playing out against the backdrop of those Lufin Basin fossil beds.
That sums it up pretty well. It's a great example of how science, especially paleontology, works. It's not static. Discoveries are made. Initial interpretations happen.
But then new evidence or just new ways of looking at old evidence can completely change the picture.
Exactly. Reevaluation is constant.
Okay.
What we think we know gets refined, sometimes overturned. It shows the process in action.
It really does. And this whole story of Bienosaurus going from this named entity back to this sort of question mark, it makes you think, doesn't it? How often do we have things in our own lives, maybe not dinosaur fossils, but ideas or assumptions that we take as solid fact?
Yeah, things we just accept.
Maybe this dubious lizard is a good reminder for all of us, to occasionally look again at the things we think we know for sure and ask, is the evidence really there? Could there be another interpretation? Maybe look with a more critical eye.
A healthy bit of scientific skepticism applied to everyday life.
Couldn't hurt, right? Well, thanks for digging into Bienosaurus with us on this deep dive.
My pleasure. It was fascinating.